What's going on, people? Myke C-Town here. Welcome to the first episode of Metal Milestones. And this is going to be a new series where I talk about metal albums that were really important to the genre. But the twist is, I'm going to be talking about them on their birthdays. So the first record I'm going to be talking about is Carcass's Heartwork, which was released on October 18th, 1993. I first heard Carcass in 9th grade, the year the album came out. Yes, I'm fucking old. This is when I was listening to mostly hardcore. I was really big on the heavy hardcore stuff like Snapcase, Integrity, Unbroken, Chokehold, Groundwork. Earth Crisis was my favorite band, and their Firestorm EP also dropped in 1993, and it completely fucked my world up. So, in high school, I was a total nerd, right? Most of the kids I hung out with, outside of the skater kids that I hung with, were metal dudes, man. And I didn't really have a lot in common with any of them. We just hung out with each other because really no one else would hang out with us. But we would share music sometimes. You know, I'd trade them hardcore for some random metal stuff. And one of the kids, his name was Andy Gardner, he told me one day about this band, Carcass. He was like, you have to hear their album Heartwork. This is after I had showed him Earth Crisis. And at the time, I wasn't a huge fan of death metal, but based on what I liked, he promised that I would dig Carcass. I listened to it, and on first listen, I wasn't really a fan. You know, I just kind of set it aside, and I returned to it a few months later. And it's weird, man. Something just clicked. I loved it at that point. I hadn't heard anything at all that sounded like that. It was heavy, it was fast, it was death metal, but there was something that was different, something that attracted me to it that I couldn't really peg at the time. But looking back on it, I'm sure it was the melody and the vocals. You know, at that time, I wasn't a fan of the heavy death metal growls, but Heartwork had more of the type of screams that I was used to with hardcore. You know, the high-pitched screams. And then the way they played, the technical riffs with the melody, like that was something I hadn't heard prior to that album. Within a few months of returning to it, it was all that I was listening to, and from there, I went backwards and I listened to all of Carcass's previous albums, and they quickly became one of my favorite bands. But let's go ahead and dive into this album. As I said, it came out in 1993, the same year that At the Gates with Fear Kiss the Burning Darkness and Dark Tranquillity's Sky Dancer came out. And the crime is, I see those two albums credited with kicking the melodic death metal thing off, but for some fucked up reason, I don't see Heartwork mentioned quite as much. And in my opinion, Heartwork is just as important as the other two albums that I named, maybe even more. This was the first album that I remember that combined the hard-hitting, crunchy sound of death metal with the really cool guitar melodies and harmonies of the new wave of British heavy metal stuff. Like, they weren't simply trying to be fast and heavy. They were concentrating on composing detailed and competent riffs. So the songs themselves really stand out quite a bit from what was going on with death metal at the time. Like, you hear just as much Iron Maiden and Judas Priest as you do Entombed. The way this album starts off with that slow riff in Buried Dreams, that slow driving riff that's just so fucking heavy. And when Jeff Walker's vocals come in, they're crazy, and the lyrics on this song are just so good. Welcome to a world of hate, your life of buried dreams smothered by the soils of fate. Welcome to a world of pain, bitterness, your only wealth. The sands of time kicked in your face, rubbed in your face. And that chorus. When expectations are quashed, when self-esteem is lost, when ambition is mourned, all you need is hate. It may seem cheesy to people now, but at the time, those lyrics were so rad to me. Like, I still think they're fantastic lyrics which speak to the confused, angsty youth in me. And you can tell this is something special when you hit those leads. The leads are so soulful, which is something that they started doing on Necroticism, but they're different here, man. The solos on this album, they just sing to you. It's the next song, Carnal Forge, that really got me, man. It has a punk-like gallop at the drums, and the riffing was fast, but again, still melodic. And they do the same type of thing on one of my other favorite songs, which I've never been able to pronounce properly because I don't speak German. Arbrit Macht Fleisch, whatever. More of the same on Blind Leading the Blind. Like, this album is full of those type of fast, techie riffs with the kind of punk feel to them. And it's interesting that people credit At the Gates Slaughter of the Soul album with this type of riffing. Like, the fact that this is even an argument is really odd to me. My favorite jam on this whole album has to be the title track, Heartwork. Like, it shows just how incredible of musicians that they are. The guitar work on this song is sick, but this showcases Ken Owens' skills on the drums. He's a madman on this track. The time changes here from gallops to blast beats to like straight up rock and roll style beats. Like, it's just great. And again, the lyrics talking about using art to display the darker side of the human condition. A canvas to paint, to degenerate, dark reflections, degeneration. A canvas to paint, to denigrate, dark reflections of dark, foul light. Another aspect of this album that makes it great to me is the blues influences. Like when you take a riff like the opening riff on No Love Lost, it always gave me such a bluesy feel. And there's such a groove to it. And I've always felt the same about the riff over the chorus in the song Embodiment. Like the melody of the leads plus the groove is what always makes me think of blues put to metal. Which is interesting because I remember reading that Jeff Walker said that Metallica's Black Album was a big influence on this album, which I can honestly kind of see. And my bluesy feeling especially makes sense here because I've read that Kirk Hammett is a big blues fan. And I'd imagine that James Hetfield is too, but I'm not a huge expert on Metallica's influences, so I could be totally off there. But I've heard a lot of people, even today, that call this Carcass's Sellout album, which is fucking stupid as shit to me. Like, how is this a sellout album when nothing else really sounded like this? In what universe does creating a truly unique album within a saturated genre constitute selling out? Like, just because it was distributed through a major, even though it's been said that the songs that are on this album were written prior to that distribution deal. And the thing about it is, listen, you know, they wrote dozens of fast grind songs with gory lyrics detailing complex autopsies or whatever. You don't think that they got a little bit bored of that? Not only that, Carcass was evolving from inception. None of their albums sounded exactly like the previous one. It's just that this one happened to be a larger jump in style from necroticism. I think it's really interesting to look back at the fact that these guys really pioneered sounds in two completely different genres. You know, they fucked up the grind world with their first few albums, and then they kicked off the melodic death metal sound with this album. And I think what makes this album special is every section of the band is in top tier. Jeff Walker's dirty bass sound and sickening vocals, Ken Owens' incredibly precise drum work, but it's the team up of Bill Steer and Michael Amott that really take the cake for me. This album is full of some of the best riffs from that era. Technical, groovy, melodic, and most interesting of all, catchy. You know, catchy is not a word that pops up with too many death metal bands of that time. And I don't mean the kind of catchy that, you know, sticks in your head just because you've listened to the album so many times that you know what's about to come next. I'm talking about the catchy that stems from riffs that are truly memorable and so well composed, and they have that tone that just sticks in your ear and enters your brain space on first listen. But the reason I want to talk about this album is because it's easily in my top 10 of favorite death metal albums of all time. You know, it holds a special place in my heart due to the time period that it came out, due to the fact that it got me to open my mind up to death metal, and the fact that it spawned the melodic death metal genre, which to this day has a very special place in my heart, seeing as how throughout the 90s and the early 2000s I snatched up anything that even remotely fit that description. But I feel like I owe my love of death metal, and especially melodic death metal, to Carcass's Heartwork and to Andy Gardner, wherever you might be. Thank you, my friend. But that's it for this first episode of Metal Milestones. Let me know what you guys think of Carcass's Heartwork, and let me know of some other Metal Milestone albums that you guys might want to see me run my yap about. Alright, as usual, thank you for living, thank you for loving, thank you for being you. Please don't die, and I'll see you guys next time. Alright, peace, bitches!